No more versatile salesman ever lived. No more human salesman ever lived. No more interesting salesman ever sold an idea to a king or to a people, to an ignorant, yearning boy, or to a pompous Pharisee. Ben Franklin is a tradition with us, a beacon light, a milestone. That's a quote from 1927 by Edgar Paul Herman in an article he wrote about salesmen of history. Now, a little over a month ago, the United States celebrated the 250th anniversary of its Declaration of Independence. By the way, given that Britain didn't formally recognize the U.S. independence until the Treaty of Paris in September of 1783, is the U.S. really only 242 years old? Anyway, I digress. How did we pull this off, fighting for and winning independence? And the constitutional government didn't begin operating until 1789. How did we get a group of politicians to come together on a government structure? There's one guy. He's known as an inventor, a scientist, even a printer. But I think his greatest feats may have been in the role of salesperson. Maybe a top 3 consensus salesperson of all time. And that is Ben Franklin. I've become enamored with this guy's sales philosophies. So today, let's talk through a few of the stories of his insane selling efforts and some of the lessons too, some in his own words. Welcome to the Sales History Podcast.
Welcome to the Sales History Podcast, the show that uncovers the forgotten stories, ideas, pioneers, and moments that shaped the sales profession and what they can teach us about selling, leading, and earning trust today. Here's your host, 3-time award-winning author, certified speaking professional keynote speaker, go-to-market sales trainer, and sales nerd, Todd Caponi.
How much do you know about Ben Franklin? For me, I knew he was a founding father. His face is on the $100 bill. He was also an inventor, a scientist, and the guy with the kite and the key. But as I read old sales magazines and books, his name keeps coming up over and over again, associated with his incredible sales skills. There's stories of him selling civil projects and public safety initiatives. He sold a library and a hospital. He sold military preparation, and he sold 2 of the most massive, complex consensus sales of all time, that without his efforts, who knows whether the United States would actually be a country. French support for the American Revolution, and at the Constitutional Convention, he drove consensus around an imperfect document in a deeply divided room. I started this episode with a quote from How to Sell magazine in 1927 when Edgar Paul Herman described Franklin as maybe the most versatile salesperson who ever lived. The point was that he sold ideas pretty much everywhere he went in incredible, diverse environments to an insane mix of buyer personas. According to Herman, in the 1927 article, he said Franklin, quote, sold a nation a philosophy of common sense and practical living, end quote, through his Poor Richard's Almanac, too. The lessons are really fantastic to me. He didn't sell through pressure or by telling people they were wrong. He was all about lowering resistance. So let's start with the young version of Ben Franklin, as he wrote in his own autobiography. He says he definitely wasn't born a salesperson. He grew up loving arguments and debating. He loved contradiction and being the guy who could pummel your logic in front of others. It sounds kind of like politics today, and many of the ways salespeople sell today, right? Like out-logic the other person. According to ushistory.org, as a teenager, Franklin stumbled upon something called the Socratic method of teaching while reaching Xenophon's memorable Things of Socrates. Franklin says in his autobiography that he became charmed by it. He stopped with the abrupt contradictions and arguments and changed his approach to one of, quote, humble inquirer and doubter. The humble inquirer and doubter, I think that's so great. So I kept digging in. And first of all, do you know what the Socratic method is? I didn't, so I read into it. It's essentially an approach that allows the person you're speaking with to come to your conclusion on their own. Like if you're talking to a child and you ask, well, what does it mean to be a good friend? And the child answers, well, it means always sticking up for them no matter what. And then you ask, well, what if your friend steals a Pokemon card from the store or something? Should you lie to protect them? And the child responds, no, stealing is wrong. You shouldn't lie for them. So you come back and say, well, does a good friend always stick up for them no matter what? And the child responds, no, not if they're doing something bad or hurting others. The point is made, the mind is changed, influence happened without ever having to make the point yourself. Now, Franklin admits that he, for a while, probably used it a little bit for evil more than just good, like as a weapon, but he got really good at drawing people into concessions they didn't see coming, and talked about how he sometimes won victories that he and his cause probably didn't deserve. But his famous advice on selling is this, quote, "The way to convince another is to state your case moderately and accurately. Then scratch your head or shake it a little and say that is the way it seems to you, but that, of course, you may be mistaken about it, which causes your listener to receive what you have to say, and like as not, turn about and try to convince you of it, since you are in doubt. But if you go at him in a tone of positiveness and arrogance, you only make an opponent of him." So Franklin knew that our brains don't like being persuaded, attacked, or being cornered. Sales and politics seem to take this approach of essentially, here's a bunch of logic, and if you don't agree, you're a moron. Logic polarizes. It pushes people into their corners instead of bringing people together. In 1955, a guy named John D. Murphy wrote about Franklin's approach, saying that when someone tries to force an idea down your throat, or you come to the person as an enemy, our minds close. Franklin instead presented ideas in a seemingly harmless way where, as the recipient, you almost couldn't help but want to consider them. And in the end, as a recipient of this approach, you always felt like the idea was your own. So let's go through a couple of these stories. Let's start by going back to the year 1787 at the Constitutional Convention. The Revolutionary War was over, and now is the incredible challenge of the United States trying to create a functioning government from the ground up. I mean, think about politics today. Can you imagine trying to wrangle a room full of opinionated jackasses together to all sign off on a new approach to government? And at a time when they just got done fighting a war against centralized government? It would be the most brutal enterprise consensus sale of all time. But Franklin was the guy credited for building that consensus. I'm totally biased in my perspective, but his magic was not only his approach, but embracing transparency and imperfection. Franklin said, quote, "I confess that I do not entirely approve of this Constitution at present." He went on to say that he had objections to it and doubts, quote, "I have lived long enough to know I have been wrong before." But using that Socratic method, he had everyone answering the question, is a general government necessary, with the same answer, yes. So instead of perfection, everyone was now focused on necessity. So not the need to approve every word, but instead to move forward together with all its faults if they are such. Franklin said, quote, "Doubt a little of his own infallibility," which got the room to understand that the imperfections are survivable. I mean, talk about the transparency sale. But again, shameless self-promotion there. But there are so many stories. For example, in the 1700s, cities like Philadelphia had a city watch system before a formalized police department. It meant people took shifts walking the streets and keeping the city safe. Franklin saw that it was inefficient and unfair. There were people paying to avoid serving. The money wasn't going where it was supposed to. But Franklin is the guy who laid out the problems and got an entire group to agree on having a police force. In other words, hiring proper people to serve consistently and fund it more equitably based on property. But it wasn't him arguing it. He had a discussion club called the Junto. The club approved his idea, then communicated it to other clubs, but never as, quote, Ben Franklin's idea. The idea was everyone's, which essentially prepared everyone else's minds for the change. Franklin was all about that, right? All about having to prepare the minds for the ideas. He didn't want or need the credit. He just wanted the ideas to spread. The fastest way to get agreement is to stop trying to take credit for the idea. Then another problem he took on was fires and establishing fire departments. He wrote a paper on the accidents and carelessness that caused house fires, including ways to avoid them. The paper led to the idea of forming a group that could quickly extinguish fires. 30 individuals were found who agreed to keep leather buckets, bags, and baskets ready to be used, who met regularly to discuss preparation for extinguishing fires. I talk about and teach this thought that it's so much more effective to lead to your solution instead of leading with it. And that was Franklin. His illumination of the problem was so easy to agree with that the solution became easy to agree with too. He actually had more people agreeing to be a part of the department than that one department could handle, which led to many departments being formed. Turns out Philadelphia became the most fire-prepared city anywhere. He sold the idea, and then he created a category. A couple more stories. Let's go to 1751. Dr. Thomas Bond had an idea to establish a hospital in Philadelphia for the sick. Bond was having a lot of trouble getting people to support the idea. I mean, the idea of hospitals in America was new and not understood. Bond went to Franklin and basically told him, hey, I can't get this done without you. Now, Bond is quoted as saying that when he was asking people to subscribe to the idea, he was asked many times, have you consulted Franklin? What does he think? So Franklin clearly had a ton of credibility. And so he went to Franklin, who studied the proposal and agreed with the idea. Then Franklin went on to, quote, prepare the minds of investors, and it worked for a while. Many investments came in, but turns out those private donations weren't going to be enough. So he went to the assembly, so the government, to essentially create a tax to pay for it. But the government objected, saying, hey, the hospital is mostly going to help those close to it in the city. Why should everybody pay for this? Instead of arguing, he designed for that concern. He got everyone in the assembly to agree that the city would essentially match private donations. So public money only goes in if private citizens show they support it. In Franklin's autobiography, he wrote that the idea quickly brought about closure, aligned incentives on both sides, and the fundraising quickly exceeded what they actually needed. So consensus selling. The stories about this guy are endless. He also tells a story in his autobiography as when his mind was changed about something he was staunchly opposed to. It had to do with an orphanage and how he studied why that happened and learned from it. Another thing I love about researching him is he was constantly trying to learn and improve himself too. So let's go on to his biggest sale, the one that really, as it relates to the United States as we know it today, had a massive impact. In the March of 1934 edition of the American Salesman magazine, they wrote an article about Franklin as a part of a series called Famous Salesmen of History. There's a bunch I'm still reading, Napoleon, Cato, Daniel Webster, and others. But in the Franklin one, the author talks about how difficult it was in the 1930s during the Depression for securities people to get people to invest because confidence was so low. Then says, imagine being Ben Franklin. So in the 1770s, Franklin was trying to raise money for the American cause to fight the Revolutionary War. But the colonies were a terrible credit risk, as you can imagine. And they were proposing to fight a war against one of the most powerful nations on the planet. So the credit was awful, and Franklin was trying to get France to pay for it, who also had its own financial problems. So talk about a horribly qualified deal, right? Well, between 1777 and 1782, Franklin sold about $60 million worth of American notes to France. Herman described that as essentially $12 million of worthless securities in a bankrupt territory. All right. So he sold something totally unproven and an unsafe investment, but he did it by selling the future. Every historian agreed that nobody on the planet but Franklin could have done it. His personality, credibility, humility, humor, and charm made him beloved to the French people. His appearance in French salons became an event. He dressed plainly, which made him stand out in a culture of status and ceremony. So we nailed transparency earlier, but he was kind of nailing authenticity here too. France and Britain were rivals. Franklin nailed the alignment of America's interests with France's motivations. So there are 6 sales lessons I've gotten from all of this research on Ben Franklin. Number 1 lesson, state your case moderately and accurately. Exaggeration triggers defense and creates skeptics. So presenting your case as though it's perfect makes decision-making harder, not easier. So the pros, the cons, moderation, it builds trust. Number 2, admit the imperfections before the buyer or any competing options weaponizes it. Franklin embraced the fact that the solution wasn't perfect. It's what I've been teaching forever, and he was a master of it 250 years ago. Number 3, using questions and humility to lower resistance. As we talked about, in Franklin's early years, he had to learn to stop being an arguer and shifted to being a humble inquirer. It was the foundation for everything, but man, can we all take that lesson to heart, especially our politicians. Number 4, prepare the mind first. The City Watch story, like the police department one, the fire department establishment story, the hospital, like over and over. Franklin educated first, discussion around the true current state second, then led to the solution instead of leading with it. Number 5, make the ideas easy for other people to own. When others felt ownership of the idea, consensus is built faster. The civic improvements didn't need to be branded Franklin's. I mean, like I started this conversation, he's not known for all these things, but he did make them all happen. Number 6, never make the buyer your opponent. And this should sound obvious, but Franklin was a master at lowering defenses, making people more curious and bringing them all together versus trying to overpower them with his own opinions and logic. Remember that 1927 article? Quote, no more versatile salesman ever lived. He sold to citizens, to politicians, to entire nations, to divided founders, and in every case, it didn't really look like selling. I mean, the guy invented the lightning rod and bifocals and the Franklin stove, but I love his sales skills and his approach to persuasion. Just researching him has made me a better selling professional. And we definitely align on this quote of his. Quote, let honesty be as the breath of my soul. So there you have it. The sales genius of Ben Franklin. As always, I so appreciate you taking the time to listen. As I say over and over again, this is just a hobby for me. So if you enjoy it, the best way to support the podcast is to subscribe to it, leave a rating or review wherever you listen, and tell a friend or two who might enjoy it as well. Or even better, post about it and help spread the word. Thanks again for listening. See you on the next episode of the Sales History Podcast.